So good morning. Welcome to the Pandemic Salon. We have a lot of people signing in. A warm welcome to our 12th Pandemic Salon. And today we are collaborating with the Elizabeth Foundation for the Arts, where I have a studio, a few of our speakers have a studio. I've been a member there for over a decade, and they are doing their virtual open studios this weekend, which I encourage you to look at. A big thank you to Derek Harner and HC Huya, who are assisting today and are here. We have some incredible speakers, but before we get into that, I just want to talk a little bit about the salon. So this is our 12th salon. We're into our 5th month, and it was originally inspired by a class that I teach at CUNY. So I always mention my students from Lehman College in the Bronx who inspired this. We went into lockdown, our class went virtual, and then we went public into a salon. We've now had over 600 participants from over 40 countries, and we have a cross-disciplinary openness under different discussion topics every few weeks. So we have done illness, anarchy, memorialization, secrets, and we have brought in medical historians, philosophers, academics, musicians, poets, of course, artists, and many, many more. Some of those can be found on Vimeo if you just Google the Pandemic Salon. And today we are talking about autonomy and the idea of autonomy. And we are, I'm scared to say this, but we are 9 days away from the election. And so this is our final salon before we go into election in the US. And this really came out of the idea of us joking a little bit of how we are really probably or maybe going to have to start a new country. And the idea of autonomy, or the idea of maybe the coasts becoming autonomous in different ways. And that has kind of evolved into our whole salon. With that, autonomy means, of course, many different things in self-regulation, liberty, sovereignty, and we have a few speakers on that I will get into later who will also be talking about the idea of testimony, facts, and the freedom in the facts, which of course in the US is starting to get harder and harder as we move forward. So I am so thrilled because we just have amazing people here from across the country and Europe and other places. So a warm welcome, and let me say a few things on the format of the salon. So there is a run of show in the chat. I'm also going to encourage you to look over all of our participants' websites. There's links to their sites and so forth. We move at a pretty quick pace. So in some ways, it is like a pechakucha, where you're getting a lot of information from a lot of different views as we move along. I really, I moderate, I keep everything on track. Hopefully I'll do as good a job as the moderators in our presidential elections this past week. I don't have a silent mic. So what I will do at 9 minutes is I will hopefully gently say, 1 more minute, and then we will finish. At the end, sometimes we have room for questions, but I'm going to really encourage an active chat. And I'm going to introduce you, I'm going to actually ask that you introduce yourself just in the chat and say hello and where you're coming from and maybe your website or a project or anything that you're working on, the location where you are and so forth. So the salon is really about bringing in community across the world, while of course all of us remain, you know, locked behind closed doors. So with that, we are going to move to our first speaker, who is Fran Illich. Good morning, Fran. How are you? So, and what led me to Fran's work was a discussion on the Zapatistas and the Zapatistas and how they organize in a non-hierarchical way. And Fran has worked as a media artist, essayist, and novelist, and he's going to discuss the Diego de la Vega Coffee Co-op that helps to fund and connect rural agricultural workers in Mexico's communities. And along with some other interesting kind of cryptocurrencies and so forth that are also autonomous. And with that, I'm just going to say a warm welcome to Fran. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. How are you?
How are you?
Hear me? Yes, right. Yes. Well, I'm going to be speaking very briefly and showing a PowerPoint, which I hope can be shown. Let's see.
So Fran is originally from Tijuana, has been working in New York for over a decade. He is a recipient of the Blade of Grass grants and many, many others. He lives in the Bronx. So I just want to say that for all of my students also kind of signing in from Lehman.
Okay. Can you see my screen now?
Perfect.
Okay. So I'm going to be speaking about autonomy as everyone else here. And the reason why I started working on this project, or one of the reasons was because life showed me how important it was to be able to practice your own decisions. Around 1995, we were a group of people that I have been working over the decades, did a publication called Cinematic, and we were also giving grants to teenager artists. And what happened was a cultural center in Mexico copied our publication and basically destroyed our economy. And that showed us how important it was to be independent. You know? Another thing that happened is Banco Bilbao Vizcaya, BBVA, a Spanish bank, stole $500 of our bank account. That was really destructive. And that showed like the kind of things that banks are good or bad for, depending if you're a shareholder or a victim, you know. That was really important because eventually that led us to start a bank. Another thing was doing Border Hack, which was an event to hack the border across the US and Mexico, Tijuana and San Diego. And this was an event that was organized for artists and for artist activists and for activists. And we would hack the border in all possible ways during 3 or 4 days a year. So one of the inspirations of the project was the Zapatistas, who achieved autonomy in many ways, including health, education, and nutrition. So when we first started the cooperative, this was in 2005, and it was during an event, during a meeting with the Zapatistas. We decided to do an autonomous server because at the time we had been kicked out from the internet from our server, from our previous server, by Bluehost, which is a commercial server based in Utah. That showed us there is internet censorship, etc., and the importance of having our own server. So we bought a computer, connected it to the internet, and started inviting people to populate it and creating an economy. The idea was also to create a sort of Zapatista-inspired startup. And part of it was building a bank that would regulate the finances of this project. These are some of the websites that originally were part of of these served possible worlds. Many publishing houses, small presses, artist groups, hackers, individuals, schools, etc. This help us create a small economy that allowed us to produce media projects such as online telenovelas and things like that. To have our own space where we could practice our own economy. Also, this allowed us to start a program of health insurance, and eventually a stock exchange to fund our own projects, other sort of funds, lend money, start our own hedge fund, our bank card, eventually our own currency. It's not a digital, it's a digital and physical currency. This was the first coin. It's 100 digital material sunflower coin, which the value fluctuates every day according to relations of all sorts with international currencies and so on. This is part of our money museum. And this is where the relation, the economical relation is shown. It's the currency converter that comes in Apple computers. The bank has been all over, including the Occupy Wall Street movement in a couple of years ago. I can't remember the years. This allowed us to be able to buy land in Mexico, 2.5 acres, to try to start our own autonomous community, something that really hasn't happened. It's very difficult to be in the city and in land at the same time, in rural land. Also, we started exporting coffee to the United States to share it, not to sell it, with activist and artist groups. This coffee comes from the Zapatista region, and it's our way to help them and help our friends in New York. This coffee crosses the border of Mexico and the US that I mentioned earlier, and is served in basically the Bronx, Manhattan, and Brooklyn. What else? Part of this project allowed us to buy a co-op apartment in the Bronx that also allows us to exist outside of the art market and in general the market. Now we are producing small movies that are funded through indigenous popcorn and etc. This is our existing money supply, or the currencies, the different currencies that we have. It's 100 coin, 1,000, 5,000, and 1 bill. This is a film club in Oaxaca where we sell our corn that help us fund movies, etc. Right? This is a cooperative that we helped start in Colima, Mexico. They sell Zapatista coffee. And yeah, this is more or less the project that I'm going to present to you. And if you have any questions, just please ask.
Dannielle, you're on mute.
You're on mute, Dannielle.
My usual occurrence these days. So thank you, Fran. I would love for you to comment on what attracted you to the Zapatistas and their organization. And you've been working with them for, I don't know, 10 to 15 years, right? And you're kind of changing and shifting relationship. And I know there's been a lot of changes with them as well. Could you just?
Yeah, I started my relationship with them, and like everybody else, from that time in 1994. So it's been some years now, I can't remember. But it's basically, I would say my relationship with them is they're my muses, or an important muse in my life. I try to learn from them as much as I can and apply their teachings to my my life and to the collective processes that I'm part of. And sometimes I even collaborate with their networks or their bigger political projects, which is difficult to do sometimes when you are this far away. And yeah.
Great. Does anyone have any questions? You're very good at your timing. We have about 1 minute.
There's a question in the chat.
Okay, I just wanted to ask one question about the land that you purchased in Mexico. Are you trying to has there been any move to make it sustainable, or what? And I know I feel the same way. I think all of us are looking for these sort of ways to be with the land that's closer, especially, and living in the city almost seems diametrically opposed to a lot of things, but then it's also close to your networks, it's close to your community. So it's I don't know. I just wanted to know what was coming up for you.
Yes. Hi, Natalia. So originally, the idea was to move with a lot of other people there. I think originally the purchase was about 150 acres, but then there was a split and we only kept 2.5. And over the years, we have learned how difficult it is to move there because you need to actually work, and people don't know how to work and want to get they want to get rewarded for the work that they're learning to do, instead of actually know how to do. So it would be more like a fellowship to people, and we cannot afford that.
Right.
And so we shifted from actually living there to the idea of having an annual camp, where different knowledges would be performed, so it's in spaces. So kind of like recreating a small 2-day, 3-day city or village. We were going to start this summer, but then something happened, the pandemic. And we don't know what's going to happen. We're thinking maybe 1 year, 2 years from now, we're going to find out what's going to happen. In the meantime, I guess the minerals and the animals are very happy there without our.
That's good. Yes.
Yes.
That's good. I like this idea of pop-up activations. Sorry.
Thank you. There's actually a few more questions for you in the chat. And so maybe you can look over them and respond. And thank you so much. The links to your project are there as well. So moving along, Pablo Elgera is going to present from his School of Pan-American Unrest. Many of you know Pablo, originally from Mexico City, is an artist, writer, performer. We're actually also married, so he's in the other room. So full disclosure. And thinking back to this Pan-American project, Pablo drove from Alaska and all the way to Tierra del Fuego. And there was a declaration through each of these countries. He's going to read part of that project and talk about it in the name of independence. So welcome to Pablo.
Thank you. So as we reflect on the subject of autonomy, this is something that really occupied my thinking back when I was creating this project, the School of Pan-American Unrest, because the subject of self-determination is very connected to nation building, to the idea of who are we and how can we create a system where we are independent. The process of independence for most countries, or all countries, I think, involve precisely answering those type of questions, which result in the writing of a constitution, in a declaration of independence, and then an attempt to construct a society that is fair, that is just, that is democratic. It's just the search for democracy, but it's also a search of collective identity. This project, the School of Pan-American Unrest, that I did in 2006, consisted in driving from Alaska to Chile, holding workshops, discussions, performances to ask people and participants to define themselves in terms of their current realities, and also see themselves as part of a greater whole. The project proposed the possibility of us thinking of ourselves as a country called Pan America. It was, of course, a fictional country, but it's rooted in historically in a lot of ideas from various thinkers about the possibility that one day all the Americas will be actually one single entity. When I did the project, we didn't have a term like social practice. I think that was just around the time when we started trying to define our practices as something that was not just something that existed within the framework of art, but something that kind of brought like other frameworks together. So I cannot really describe the whole project to you. All I'm going to do is I'm going to read the Pan American address that I would that I read at the beginning of the journey. We did one collectively in each country that we went to. This one is called the Pan American Speech. And what I'm going to do, simply, I'm just going to share images of the project that will like rotate as I read the address, because we don't have time to go through everything right now. Okay. Pan Americans, I stand before you today to speak of the place where we live, and yet might not give much thought. It is a place through which I shall soon travel in a long journey in order to find some of its essence. This place is called Pan America. This is not a political speech, nor is it a call for revolution. I am no leader or politician, nor has my speech the intention to ask you to join a collective fight, but rather to incite you to embrace your own independence and your own universality as individuals by considering what it means to be Pan-American. I cannot deny that I might be embracing in this speech and in the journey that I'm about to undertake the most ambiguous of terms, the most relative of beliefs, and the greatest of abstractions. But while it might be misguided to still believe in ideals, we also know that nations and societies have not been on pragmatism alone. There is no better place to start a journey than in this very room, which represents to many the very meaning of immigration, the hopes of those who wanted to have a better life, and who through their hopes helped give richness to this nation. I was reading this speech in Ellis Island. Now, more than ever, it is important to understand that our past is inextricable from these journeys. Now, more than ever, it is important to remember that we all are Pan-Americans. I search Pan America, I confess, with distrust, skepticism, and yet with the hope to redefine and understand a word that has been misused, misunderstood, and perhaps taken away from us by ideology and rhetoric. Perhaps I search for Pan America because I want to know if its true spirit died with our economic and political dissolutions in the 20th century. Perhaps I search for Pan America because I crave the sense of purpose and idealism that our ancestors had. Perhaps I seek to name it because of the sense of unity and the grounded sense of identity that we all once had and seems to be gone. Today we live in distrust, fear, and disappointment. I believe that in art today we look backwards because of a sense that there's no future. We are ironic because we're afraid of assert new truths. We're skeptical because we're afraid to fail. But sometimes one has to fail, and one has to be assertive, even at the risk of being wrong. And I believe if we did all we could, then we could not say we really failed. Perhaps I search for Pan America because I want to believe in the fantasies that once this vast land inspired. From the first settlers in the 16th century to the millions of immigrants who arrived through Ellis Island, America has been a place of promise, a place of richness and endless possibilities. It has been a place of transformation where immigrants could found their societies and build new systems, born out of their religion, their faith, and their cultural practices. Ever since the 16th century, we have been in an incessant process of construction, of unrest. We seem to be continuing an unfinished story. In the last 2 decades of the 20th century, we thought economic freedom would bring political liberty. Modernization should promote democracy. Every new effort of the second half of the 20th century ended up grounded. Economic failure repeated arrested democratization as emergency conditions made men surrender to quick-fix dictatorships. Nationalism is populism. Religion supports imperial capitalism. Disneyland's contribution to Pan America was to create the utopian idea of the American fairyland into a corporate enterprise. Neoliberalism has failed. Our national identity projects were shattered in Tlatelolco, Santiago, and Buenos Aires between 1968 and 1973. Karl Marx's prediction that America would be the first terrain of the socialist revolution proved false. We are given an option between hegemony and dictatorship. We have drawn the very cartoons of our greatest hopes.
1 minute.
Why should I seek Pan America then? Why try to ignore the abysmal discrepancies between the wealthy and the dispossessed? Perhaps I seek to Pan America because I want to know if there's indeed a cultural thread among all of us that goes beyond political and economic ties. We shall seek Pan America by embracing the anonymous and the unknown, and hopefully recognize ourselves and all of us in some aspect of that unknown. And we shall seek to understand it with the language of art, which never provides precise data or quantifiable evaluations, but which provides other kinds of knowledge and connects us in necessary ways. We shall not seek to preach, but to listen, and we will not seek to mythologize, but to depict. And no matter how short or how long this journey may become, we shall always keep in mind that Pan America starts and ends with each and every one of us, for it is first and foremost a place of our mind where we shall find our guiding light and our deeper truths.
Thank you so much, Pablo. I'm going to ask if you have any questions for Pablo or comments, and thank you for everyone introducing themselves as well. Please post them in the chat. We are moving on to Jason File, who is a new member at the Elizabeth Foundation, and I met Jason a few years ago when he was a resident at NARS. And I'm always deeply respect his work, and I find him just a very interesting, thoughtful person who is not only an attorney, but a visual artist. And I think that's a very interesting combination. Following his presentation, I'm actually going to read a little bit of Charles Reznikoff's testimony, who of course was also an attorney. With that, Jason is an artist, international lawyer, former United Nations war crimes prosecutor. He is going to discuss the function of institutions, their role in shaping societal norms, and the use of law as an artistic medium in connection to autonomy. So welcome, Jason.
Thank you, Dannielle. Thanks so much for inviting me. I'm very honored to be included in this illustrious group of people here, and also looking forward to learning from everyone else here. I guess the kind of the organizing idea for my few minutes here is kind of around alternatives to autonomy in art, and by that I mean there's kind of a tried and true, I think, model for artists to exist in the world, and to protect some sort of autonomy for their own practices by, you know, what is generally called the hustle, but trying to find ways to make a living, to support an artistic practice. And you know, we know that happens in so many different ways. What I've done in my own practice has been kind of to run in the opposite direction, which is to kind of embrace my day job also as a kind of residency, or a sort of site of intervention or performance sometimes. And so I wanted to sort of illustrate for you some examples of the form that takes, and when we can go from there. So I'll share my screen and show some slides here. Let's make this full screen. So a lot of what I'll show will come from my time in The Hague, working as a war crimes prosecutor for the United Nations. This is a scene of a mass grave in Bosnia that's being investigated by UN forensic analysts in 1995, following the end of the civil war in Bosnia and the breakup of Bosnia and Yugoslavia. That is, we didn't have at the time proper forensic tents to protect the investigation site, so that is a a circus tent in the back, which is what was used at the time, because that's what was available in the region. Obviously, when you make a transition from this very kind of difficult to understand visual to a legal document like this, which is what was generated by these investigators, autopsy reports for every single set of remains that was recovered. Thousands of these reports exist in the UN archives and would be tendered as evidence by us as prosecutors. There was always a spot on the last page for a drawing, and the drawing was always used as a substitute for photography. Because if you take photographs, then you have to call a witness in and have them explain what they're looking at. It's often very difficult to understand. And so the drawing essentially allowed the person looking at the document to sort of put themselves in the shoes of the investigator, to have that same level of expertise and to focus in on the key pieces of evidence that were relevant for the trial. Like, these people had blindfolds, these people were wearing civilian clothes, that sort of thing. All of which was important to us to respond to either the kind of conspiracy theory arguments, the sorts of things on the other side that would relate to, you know, they would say this was a battlefield burial of soldiers, you know, who had been killed in battle. And obviously these facts are important. But I was also sort of troubled by the way that these pieces of evidence were always being used collectively and not individually. Kind of the individual would be sort of lost in this sea of documentation. And so I did a project that essentially removed all this contextual information and essentially restored that to essentially like a life-size drawing that's done in charcoal over a little shelf that captures the dust from the process of doing the wall drawing. And it's temporary, it just gets erased and painted over at the end of the exhibition. That's in an institution called Stroom, which is in The Hague. And you can see the different sort of styles of drawings that the different investigators did, which I also found this kind of amazing crossover of subjectivity and objectivity in one place. We also used photography. We had to show, for example, that in kind of supporting a genocide charge, you want to show this sort of effort to really eliminate in whole or in part a group of people. Here it was Bosnian Muslims who were being eradicated and being forcibly displaced from certain parts of Bosnia. One of the techniques was to destroy the mosques after the villages had been cleared, often replacing them with garbage dumps and other things to try to desecrate the space as much as possible. As prosecutors, we had to show what the mosques looked like before they were destroyed. Sometimes in the smaller villages, we didn't have the best evidence of what that looked like. So in this case, we had to tender a postcard as evidence, a postcard from the Sarajevo Olympics in 1984. And so I was always kind of captivated by this transition in the status of these types of images, going from a postcard to a piece of war crimes evidence. And I wanted to try to return it to its original status, but preserve that identity of the document. And so this is at the Imperial War Museum in London. So the idea here was you know, not to put the art on the wall, but to put it in the bookshop where a postcard belongs and have it kind of circulate in commerce in the same way. And so that was kind of another approach to this type of, I guess, highlighting elements from my day job that I come across that I thought could sort of live another life in a different context. I have some video evidence. I'm not going to show it. It would take too long. I did some performances, so I would invite members of the art community in the Netherlands to come to court and watch a cross-examination of a defense witness in different circumstances. Won't show the videos now, but that was a sort of area of practice that I was exploring as kind of like a ready-made performance. I did it with confidential documents as well. We'd have to use documents in closed session and then destroy them afterwards in this gigantic shredder. So I did a performance where I would shred one of these military documents that was classified. And then later on, I recovered the shreds from some of these document destructions and made it back into paper, and was thinking about how this kind of fantasy of the blank slate that you can write on is never really true, and that you're always sort of building on top of secrets or on top of violence that is sort of either fading away or is suppressed or that we ignore in order to sort of go about our daily lives. And so I was trying to sort of capture that sort of circular motion in that sort of work. I started using some of the footage from the cross-examinations and try to incorporate them into some installations. So this is one in the National Museum of History in Bosnia in Sarajevo. And this was the cross-examination of I would say a genocide minimizer, a witness who was kind of minimizing the severity of a lot of the war crimes that took place in the early 90s in Bosnia. And so one of the points that was made in that was about the conditions that residents of Sarajevo had to go through during the siege. That witness was kind of resisting the idea that the conditions were quite as bad as people thought they were. So I wanted to install this with artifacts from the historical museum, which were these sort of homemade stoves that people had built in order to burn books and furniture and other things to stay warm during the winters, because the gas had been turned off, and it was turned off for years, or the little water tank that people had to use to get water because their water was turned off. So trying to make these objects in a historical museum also sort of like counter witnesses to the narrative that is spun by different witnesses in different circumstances. And then this is video documentation of another one where I took one and turned it into kind of like an accompanying script. So I made a film script to go with the cross-examination. I'll just show that clip, and then that'll be it. It's about 1.5 minutes. There are images of Rambo in the upper right side of that. That was part of the cross-examination, as you'll see.
And in your statement at paragraph 26, you also discussed this today at temporary transcript 21. You say, although Unmos were supposed to be unarmed, many of them had weapons. They were like Rambo. Now, from your answer today, when you talked about them being armed and aggressive, what you meant by this is that they looked and acted like Rambo, correct?
That is correct, yes.
You're talking about the film character Rambo, right?
That's right, yes.
Now, you would admit that this is an exaggeration, right?
Yes, I would.
And you're aware that engaging in this kind of exaggeration could have the effect of demeaning your United Nations colleagues from that time.
May I have a minute to think about that question?
You may.
Yes, I would agree with you.
So I guess just to sort of finish up, I sort of have this fantasy of different professionals in different industries who are also artists, maybe in law, science, medicine, politics, and government. And I'm always asking myself sort of how that would potentially change those institutions, but also how it would change the artists. So I'll leave you with that that thought about kind of merging art practices with other
Thank you so much. Such amazing work. So moving. And I'm going to ask, we are at 10 minutes, so I'm going to ask if there are any questions. Please put them in the chat for Jason. Please, follow his work, and there's a link to his website as well. I'm going to follow that with a conversation that always comes up with Jason, and a piece of literature that I've always really, really loved, which is Charles Reznikoff's testimony. And Reznikoff was also an attorney in New York, son of Jewish immigrants into Brownsville, New York. And while researching a law encyclopedia over many years, he essentially compiled a book of appropriated cases. And they are pretty much just lifted out of the context of the testimonies that he was reading. It's called The Testimony, the United States, 1885 to 1915. So he went through thousands of volumes of court cases, hundreds of pages of transcripts. I'm just going to read a few excerpts because I think this really kind of follows you in some ways. I always stand when I read, so I'm going to do that. So, it's hard to read testimony. When they told her husband that she had lovers, all he said was, one of them might have a cigar and set the barn on fire. I'm going to read just two more quick ones. Reznikov really wrote on a lot of racial strife, more so than any of the other American and objective poets at that time. The conductor asked her where she was going. Knoxville City. He said, you ought to have changed at Knoxville Junction. Why didn't you tell me when we were there? He told her to get off, but she wanted to stay on until the next station. The train was stopped, and the conductor asked if she was getting off. He said if she didn't, he would just kick her off, and that he was tired of these damn Negroes. He threw her bundle on the ground and put her baby beside it. She followed, and the train left her standing there. I'm going to read one more title called Negroes. One night in April or May, his daughter saw someone's hand make the curtain, which was drawn tightly across her window, bulge, and ran to the adjoining room in her nightclothes. Where he and his son were sitting, he ran around the house one way and his son ran the other way, and they found a Negro under a workbench within 6 or 8 feet of the window, holding a piece of plank before his face, begging them not to shoot. So I will also post a link to Charles Reznikov, and so thank you so much to Jason as well. And we're moving on to an amazing collective that is here all the way from Helsinki, the YCon collective. And how I usually structure the salons is I go through a period of research for quite a while with readings and research. And again, this goes back to the question of starting a new country or starting a new nation. And YCon started in 2003. It's a collective of 5 members. We have 3 here. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So I don't want to, I'm getting shy about my Finnish names. But I'm just going to welcome them. Hi.
Hello, welcome.
Welcome from Helsinki.
From Helsinki.
Thank you so much for being here.
Should we start?
Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. So we are 3 members of UConn here, and we will rotate through. So, and the idea for our 10 minutes is a bit telling our story of the last 17 years, how we have become more and more humble in our utopian fantasy production. So I talk with the grand schemes and then we go more humble. Okay, I share my screen and then let's start. All right. So UConn was started in 2003 in the aftermath of the first summit of micronations. So the artist members, they organized this event and we decided to continue with this topic. The term micronation was rather new at that time. It was in the middle of 90s. And it kind of was an umbrella term for all kind of phenomena where people experimented with the idea of independence, autonomy, and sovereignty, and trying to play also with the idea of state. What is the state actually? What is it? And can I create one? So the term has then been applied retroactively also for much earlier phenomena. Econ started actually by cataloging this kind of projects. Here's a sample from our database, very old school database. But as you can see, at that time in the 90s, most of these micronation projects were water-based, so ocean-based, because that was the place where people thought, okay, there is space. The land is already divided. There's no more space, but the oceans would be, you know, there is a chance to establish a new country. Here in the bottom right, for example, Aquarius Rising, that was a spirulina-based kind of a colony project. So they wanted to build this weird floating structure on the sea and farm spirulina. The oldest micronation, what we found, is the Kingdom of Paradise, and this is something I really can recommend to study a bit more. It's a German lawyer who went to America to join the Cherokee Indian, and then he tried to persuade this Cherokee Indian to create a communist kind of a community, but they used very explicit this idea of a kingdom, so actually some sort of a state structure. And they also had this idea that because as a kingdom they are sovereign and they are independent from the colonial power, so all the slaves could come there and live free and equal. And so that was the idea, and they succeeded a couple of years, but then the colonist powers didn't like that too much, and he didn't survive for long. But amazing kind of utopian, lived utopia, practical utopian kind of, sorry, I get lost, but it's amazing. You should study this. Another influence is this book, Anarchy, State and Utopia. It very much influenced a lot of these micronations. This comes a bit more from a libertarian, conservative, or let's say right-wing perspective. This Nozick was kind of complaining that the left had kind of occupied this idea of utopia, and there's very few kind of attractive libertarian or right-wing utopia. So he tried to create a meta-utopia, so a minimal state in which there's a lot of micronations which are competing in a free market for citizens. So you could have one micronation embracing very specific kind of forms of living together, and they are competing with another micronation. So that was his meta-utopia. But then the most crucial book is this one, How to Start Your Own Country. The subtitle of this book is actually How You Can Profit from the Decline of the Nation State. So that was a do-it-yourself book written in that style. And this Erwin S. Strauss, he kind of cataloged most of these a bit earlier projects. And this got us inspired to actually, we learned about Sealand, which is on the cover here. And this is this strange platform in the North Sea, where these guys in 1968 kind of occupied this platform. It was left there from the Second World War, abandoned. And they started a pirate radio station. So it started with radio, but then they decided, why not, we can declare a principality and create our own kind of country. And then let's see what we can do with it. So it was, they didn't know really what to do, but maybe it's good to declare it and then let's see what we can do. So this Principality of Sealand was one. I have to hurry, just a thing. So this was one of the people we wanted to invite because they were on this weird platform and it was a bit mysterious. So we thought, hey, this would be really great to invite them to Helsinki and kind of talk with them and see what kind of people are this. We invited 5 other micronations, which we thought all represent a very specific angle on this topic. So here is Ladonia is a project which is, let's say, it represents more the Dadaistic side, is a parody of a state. So there, anybody can be a minister, in this country. And here we see the Minister of Art and Charm performing the national anthem, which is the object falling into the water. Then we have Kingdom of Elgaland and Wagaland is an artistic project as well, who declared all no man's lands, all the border zones between countries as their territory. And so it's a project which is interesting. When there was a kind of border conflict, they kind of said, this is our territory and what are you doing, and so on. So they were playing with that board. And then here the last one is a more an activist project where people really were thinking about a completely new system of global direct citizen representation, the Transnational Republic. Huge project. So we had all them in Helsinki, and so they came together in this amazing Alva Aalto building where 30 years earlier the East and West Bloc had met for the first time. And so we kind of also kind of occupied this building and this discourse and tried to bring these people together. But now I have to move on, and you will see how we became more humble with our plans.
Hello, I'm Tellervo. So the phenomena of micronations was really inspirational tool for us to reflect and unpack this construction of nation states. But to be honest, after a while, we got a bit tired of it, as in many cases, we felt that this micronation stayed a bit stuck in that play. And then our focus shifted to hands-on utopian experiments, or practical utopias, as we like to call them. And we started to work in Australia, even though there are this kind of intentional communities, as they are often called. They exist all around the world naturally, but life brought us to Australia, where in '73 there was a festival called Aquarius Festival, where it was kind of self-organized festival with the topic of community, and it became really life-changing event for many, and hundreds of people started communities there. And we made their movie called The Making of Utopia, and I think Dannielle will make a link to that movie, but just to say short, the communities in the movie had all their very own relationship to the question of self-sustainability or own kind of relation to the world outside. But I must say that these communities which survived, we were exactly interested in communities which survived still in 30 years they are together and running. Some similarity was that none of them wanted to be totally cut off or independent. None of them had that fantasy. And also another quite maybe even surprising discovery was that in all of them, the rules actually played quite an important role. Wisely made rules was some kind of the spine of those communities. And we have one scene in that movie where young people who want to maybe join the community, they are shocked when they learn that this community actually have 66 pages of rules. It's really like against what they had imagined. And then just shortly to mention that we also worked with, we also worked with other summit, and that was 10 years after the Summit of Micronations, and then that became the Summit of Practical Utopias, which we organized in Brioni Island, which is Tito's old residency island, where he started non-aligned movement in 70s. And there we invited like different thinkers and activists and groups who worked on utopian vision with hands-on approach. We invited them to this island for 4 days to interact with each other. And now I let Sauli to continue. Bye.
And just quickly, in the end, I know we are over time already, but so we went.
Let's just go ahead, yeah.
Okay, good. So we went to basically like, we wanted to create a space for individuals. So after these big structures and big micronations, big and small, but like communities, we wanted to actually to focus on these individuals and how to create this everyday life, a playground, an experiment field, and basically challenge their conventions and habits. And basically, through this transformation, we started to use these game-like structures to engage people, to help them experiment social interactions in safe surroundings. So this approach took us to host dinner parties in Berlin with local artists in gallery. And we created structures, game rules that empowered players to encounter others, to question their learned habits and behave in new ways. Through these game settings, players can experience becoming more autonomous as their own unconscious rules were overtaken by the empowering ones. And then because of this kind of collaboration and ideas we did with Culture Push afterwards, we started to do this Practical Utopia series. And we did this dinner also in New York. And then after that, we started to do the 7 exercises in Practical Utopia. And there was, for example, one experiment with an exercise that was held by Yvonne Short, and I don't know if you know about her, but she's New York based, and she was empowering women of the community to teach how to use power tools to build a house together. And actually the teaching method was YouTube. And then we created this summit of practical utopians for the people. And we were creating this as a week long, and it was starting with the retreat. We went to this Red Gable and beautiful cabin, and the summit started as a discussion and co-creation on topics: how can we unlearn and experiment more with routines and behaviors embedded in our social interactions? How does urban space shape our social interactions, both overtly and subconsciously? And how do we make the new normal? The concrete outcome of the retreat was a collectively designed app. The app allows the users to choose new pathways through their day-to-day and shift their thinking on practice and community with others. So from state-like structures, we moved to communities, and from which we moved to individuals, and how to empower them to take practical, autonomous actions towards utopia. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sebi. So I have posted, there's a number of links to YCon on the right. Thank you so much. I know you had 3 people, so first time I've done a big collective like that. Thank you so much for coming, like I said, all the way from Helsinki. With that, we're gonna move into our music section of the end of our program. And we have 2 salon regulars. Lily's becoming a salon regular. So Lily Desmond, welcome. And she's going to play a song for us, the 4th of July. And then we will finish with Matthew. And I will conclude with the reading of names, which is going to be a little different today. So thank you. And please look at the links of all of our presenters. We have a fast moving salon that introduces you to a lot of different thoughts and artists, and an invitation for you to learn more about all of them. Hi, Lily. Welcome.
Hey, thank you. All right, so I'll just dive right in. This song is called 4th of July. It's by Amy Mann, and it was the anthem that my parents raised me on. We sang it every time that we walked to the bridge on Independence Day to go watch the fireworks, and it helped to remind me that there is a tension between individual autonomy and being part of a community, and it's important to make sure that you know, things align when you are with a group. It's a tension that I think about a lot. So I've just posted the lyrics in the chat.
And you have an album coming out.
Yes.
October 31st. So want to know about that.
Yes, yeah. Self-plug. I have an album coming out. I'll post my Instagram and website stuff later, but yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for listening. All right. I am alone and harboring thoughts of our home. It's one of my faults that I can't quell my past. I ought to have gotten it gone. I ought to have gotten it gone. Oh, baby, I wonder if when you are older someday, you wake up and say, my God, I should have told her. What would it take? But now here I am and the world's gotten colder, and she's got the river down which has sold her. So that's today's memory lane, with all the pathos and pain. Another chapter in a book where the chapters are endless and they're always the same. A verse and a verse and refrain. Oh, baby, I wonder if when you are older someday, you'll wake up and say, my God, I should have told her. What would it take? But now here I am and the world's gotten colder, and she's got the river down which has sold her. And she's got the river down which has sold her. Thank you, guys.
You give me the chills, Lily. There's actually chills here, really. I just have such a visceral response to your voice every time. So really always amazing and so beautiful to hear you. Thank you so much. And please put your link in there for the album for people to look at. And with that, we are moving on to Matthew Evan Taylor, another Pandemic Salon darling. So Matthew is hailing from Birmingham and is now a professor at Middlebury in Vermont. And we met amazingly in a pizzeria in Miami, which is another long story that is not for the salon, but we've had a long-term collaboration with abstraction and music and with my animations and many things. And he's just an incredible person, a musician and composer and educator, and has a new project called Say Their Names. I'm gonna hand it over to you. Welcome, Matthew. Hi.
Hi. So hello, everybody. What's interesting about the project that I'm talking about today is it's actually an organic outcrop of my own reckoning with a world where commissions for large scale pieces from organizations like symphonies or even small ensembles like string quartets doesn't exist. And so how do I survive? So I had to develop my own practice for creating, recording, and putting out music, which, you know, on the face of it isn't that revolutionary, but for me, as somebody who's come to rely on those pillars, it was a bit of a leap of faith. And so this project, Say Their Names, came out of this time period, and it's the 7 days of reactions to the first 7 days of the protests. And so the selection I have for you today is called I Only Have Two Cheeks, which features the voice of oh boy, her name's Ms. Moody. It's her name, and she Dannielle Moody, and she kind of, in the sample that I use, she takes on kind of two, in an oblique way, she takes on two pillars of American thought and what organizes our society, commerce and religion, and has a very hostile take on it, and how it relates to race. So I hope you enjoy. The album is called Say Their Names. It's also part of a larger thing that I've released called the Unheard Mixtapes, which are all available on Bandcamp. And I'll put the link in the chat. So here we go.
If you are more concerned with the fire of a fucking target than you are that you sat and watched on video for over 8 minutes a white police officer kneel on the neck of a black man like he was a fucking dog, then you are the problem. I only have 2 cheeks. How many times am I supposed to turn them? If you are more concerned with the fire of a fucking target than you are that you sat and watched on video for over 8 minutes a white police officer kneel on the neck of a black man like he was a fucking dog, then you are the problem. 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 2 cheeks. Then you are the problem. Then you are the problem. Cheeks. How many times am I supposed to turn them? How many times am I supposed to turn them? How many times am I supposed to turn them? How many times am I supposed to turn them? How many times am I supposed to turn them? How many times am I supposed to turn them? How many times am I supposed to turn them? How many times am I supposed to turn them? How many times am I supposed to turn them? How many times am I supposed to turn them? How many times am I supposed to turn them? How many times am I supposed to turn them? How many times am I supposed to turn them? How many then you are supposed to turn them? How many then you are supposed to turn them? How many then you are supposed to turn them? How many then you are supposed to turn them? How many then you are supposed to turn them? How many then you are supposed to turn them? How many then you are supposed to turn them? How many then you are supposed to turn them? How many then you are supposed to turn them? How many then you are supposed to turn them? How many then you are supposed to turn them? then you are the problem. How many times am I supposed to turn? Then you are the only. How many times am I supposed to turn? Then you are the problem. How many times am I supposed to turn? Then you are the only. How many times am I supposed to turn? Then you are the problem. How many times am I supposed to turn? Then you are the only. How many times am I supposed to turn? Then you are the problem. How many times am I supposed to turn? Then you are the only. How many times am I supposed to turn? Then you are the problem. How many times am I supposed to turn? Then you are the only. How many times am I supposed to turn? Then you are the problem. How many times am I supposed to turn? Then you are the only. How many times am I supposed to turn? Then you are the problem. How many times am I supposed to turn? Then you are the problem. How many times am I supposed to turn? Then you are the problem. How many times am I supposed to turn? Then you are the problem. How many times am I supposed to turn? Then you are the problem. How many times am I supposed to turn? You are the problem. How many times am I supposed to turn? You are the problem. Then 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 you are the problem.
Thank you.
Matthew, so powerful, and a lot of comments for you in the chat as well. I just posted 2 articles as well, and really uncomfortable, as we should all be at this really critical moment, and absolutely autonomous from a lot of what is going on in music and so forth. And you can follow Matthew and all of our artists and presenters today, and just amazing. We are at 1:14, and I get a little German on these things, so I am going to keep us right on time. And I just want to say a big thank you to our incredible session, on autonomy. And like I said, we have a fast-moving session, so we have a lot of different viewpoints, artists for you to follow and research. Those of you who've been on the salon before know that we end the salon usually, and this started in March and April when we had over 1,000 people dying a day in New York City. Especially in the Bronx, where my students were from. That was really hard hit. So we usually close with names of people who've died by COVID. We are actually today going to read dead countries. So I'm going to read 9 dead countries just as a little bit of an alternative with that. So with that, I'm going to say thank you, and thank you to the Elizabeth Foundation for hosting us today. Thank you to all my amazing presenters and participants that came. With that, the 9 countries that have ceased to exist in the 20th century, and I have pages of these regions and countries. Neutral, Morisnet, 1816 to 1920. Republic of Salo, 1943 to 1945. Tibet, 1912 to 1951. United Arab Republic, 1958 to 1971. Sikkim, 1642 to 1975. Ceylon, 1505 to 1972. Czechoslovakia, 1918 to 1993. East Germany, 1949 to 1990. So with that, hopefully maybe in America, we'll have to start another country soon by the time we have our next salon. So with that, thank you everyone. This will be recorded. It'll be cataloged on Vimeo as well. Thank you all for attending. And with that, I'm going to officially close. If anyone wants to, stay and chat, I'll be on for a few minutes. So thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Ooh, right on time. My timer just went off.
Brilliant.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Wait, Matthew, I had a question. Were you just playing that music, or were you doing